Hello, it's Lord Slar here, and today I am continuing my Versus series by putting together two of the most popular Silurian stories against each other to determine which is better. The original Silurians is perhaps one of Doctor Who's best. It's very fondly remembered by almost all Who fans and is praised for its subversion of the normal alien invasion trope by having the creatures featured in the story having inhabited Earth for longer than us. It creates quite a moral dilemma as to who Earth really belongs, and whether the two species can live in harmony, or whether they must compete with each other for supremacy over the planet until one destroys the other. It's a marvellous idea that is fertile ground for compelling stories. It's just a shame not too much has been done with it outside of this first story. The Hungry Earth Cold Blood is probably best described as a modern interpretation of the original story, making the two extremely similar, although there are a few key differences. We'll be examining those differences today to determine which story did this compelling idea better and why that is the case. The first thing to examine about these two stories is the TARDIS themes and how well they are used in both stories. For John Pertwee, this was only his Doctor's second appearance and he is already showing how much he is owning the role. Pertwee gives a brilliant performance and this story is extremely good for his Doctor, as after the action-oriented spearhead from space we get to see a more philosophical side of this Doctor and what really drives him, particularly through his desperation to get the Silurians and the humans to cooperate. Throughout the story we can see how genuinely fearful he is of a peaceful solution not coming about. It's such an excellent performance, especially for a new Doctor, and it carries the drama of the dilemma out of the TV and into the viewer's mind. Liz Shaw is the companion for this story and is also her second appearance. She plays a lesser role in this story than she did in Spearhead, where she was arguably given more of an introduction than Pertwee's Doctor himself, so it makes sense for her to be a little less of a presence here. That being said, she is a really enjoyable presence in the story, and Caroline John puts in a charming performance, and she does lots of detective work for the Doctor as well as being involved in much of what the Doctor does scientifically. After all, Liz is one of those companions that isn't really a companion, but more of an equal of the Doctor in many ways. The Brigadier is definitely worth mentioning as well. As usual, Nick Courtney puts in a very charismatic performance, but what's most interesting is the way in which we're shown the Brig and the Doctor coming into conflict. Unlike the Doctor, the Brigadier is bound by higher authority and duty, which leads him to destroying the Silurian base under orders from the government. This serves to show that the relationship between the two characters is far more dynamic than just friends, and it's something that's explored throughout the Pertwee era, although sadly the Brig begins to become a bit of a caricature of himself later on in the series, but that doesn't stop this conflict and strain in their relationship from being very engaging and very interesting. Similar to Pertwee, Matt Smith was new to the role during this story, but was further into his first season. Matt Smith clearly put in an energetic performance, but sadly I can't say it's quite close to Pertwee's. While his Doctor certainly does dip into the dilemma about how to allow the Silurians and the humans to live together peacefully, it's never explored to the same extent, and I don't get the same sense of desperation and fear which Pertwee's Doctor had about the whole thing, and at the end of the day, Pertwee had a better script and put in a better performance. This is no slight on Chris Chibnall or Matt Smith, mind you, as the Silurians is one of the show's best scripts and Pertwee really did give his all for that story in particular. It's just something that's difficult to beat. However, I do feel that some of the energy in the original script just isn't present, which is probably to do with the fact that it's largely a retread of the same material and ideas, at least where the Doctor is concerned. Amy and Rory are the companions for this story, and they do a decent job. They didn't annoy me here for one thing, which they would come to do in future episodes, so that's a plus. They didn't have a whole lot to do with the plot itself, mind. They were both involved, but most of the focus is on the side characters in this story, with the exception of the story arc related stuff towards the end. The bit where Rory dies did annoy me, but only retroactively since that was the first of so many deaths over the course of his tenure, so I can ignore it here. They both act pretty well and do get some good moments. I don't really have any complaints, but nor did I think that either of them particularly excelled either. To conclude, while for the companions of the story there isn't a massive difference in terms of quality, there certainly is in terms of the Doctor, as Pertwee puts in nothing less than an amazing performance made better by the script that brings so much to his new Doctor, which when compared to Matt Smith's admittedly decent but nothing special performance isn't really much of a match. The original wins this category handily. Plot is the next category, which this time is a bit odd to discuss since both stories at their heart are doing almost exactly the same thing. Humans, while underground, discover and awaken a colony of Silurians, and they both feel entitled to the planet, and the Doctor tries to mediate but fails due to hostile acts by both sides. However, the way in which both stories develop themselves and deal with the dilemma is very different. In the original, we are slowly eased into the core idea behind the story, and it is built up as a mystery. It's slowly revealed over the course of the story, and it makes it very engaging to watch. There is a payoff once the mysteries are revealed, with the conflicts beginning to erupt due to the dilemma shown most dramatically with the plague the Silurians spread. All the while, the tension is kept high by the Doctor's attempts to ensure a peaceful solution despite the hostile acts. What really plays in this drama's favour is the fact that all of the side characters have very different agendas, making the conflict between the humans more interesting and dynamic. The newest story takes a different approach. While it does start with a mystery, it is rather short-lived, since the moment the Doctor recognises the Silurians, the audience know what's going on due to the previous encounters with them, and for those who don't, it's quickly explained to them through dialogue. This puts it at a bit of a disadvantage to the older story, as it can't build up as enticing a mystery since the plot has already been done before. However, it does continue from that point in a very similar way to the older episode by using conflicts caused by the Silurian dilemma to escalate the drama, and it does work, almost as well even. However, due to the limited time, it does not have the opportunity to introduce things like the plague in the original, which was a particularly interesting and dramatic part of the story, which I don't think the newer story really manages to top ever, nor does it really have the time to do so. To conclude, the plot is superior in the original story, which is partially down to the fact that the idea in the original story was new, meaning more drama could be extracted from the mystery of it, and also partially because it has far longer to tell its story, meaning it can be much more developed, at least if it has a good writer, which the Silurians certainly did. The plot in the newest story is by no means bad, it's competent, and can even be compelling at points, particularly when the Silurian hostage is killed, but it never quite reaches the dramatic heights of plagues and base takeovers. The side characters are the next category to analyse. This is definitely where the two stories vary most. The Silurian contains a roster of side characters who are officials, higher-ups, and those high up in the military, in the sciences, and in the civil service. This is juxtaposed by the side characters in The Hungry of Cold Blood, who are pretty much just regular people, which naturally changes the nature of the conflict within the story quite dramatically. However, I should note I am confused as to the nature of the people working on the drill in the newest story, as it's never really explained who they're working for, and who's funding what must presumably be a very expensive project, yet so lightly staffed and looks very cheap and unofficial. But partially unexplained plot elements aside, the new episode was definitely going for side characters who were just ordinary people, which does differentiate it from the original and gives a different take on what people would do about the Silurian dilemma. The side cast of the Silurians is very strong, with Peter Miles in particular being one of Doctor Who's favourites. He can play particularly nasty men extremely well. They all put in good performances. It's the kind of thing you'd only really get back then, with the very Shakespearean class of British actors being more prevalent at the time. Acting aside, the writing for them is very good. They all develop over the course of the story in their own ways, and each of them have different agendas, leading to many different reactions to the Silurians, which leads to a lot of great inter-character conflict and drama. It's exactly what you'd expect from a writer as strong as Malcolm Hulke. The cast isn't bad for the newest story, but nobody particularly knocked my socks off, other than some surprisingly really good child acting. The characters are all distinct and develop over the course of the story quite well actually, which is rare for a New Who story. This certainly benefits hugely from being 2 episodes long. The lack of cynical agendas that were in the characters of the previous story leads to a far different reaction to the Silurians, as despite the fear and the fact the Silurians have captured some of the humans, they're willing to be convinced by the Doctor to make peace, and try and show the Silurians the humans at their best. While this doesn't quite work, both sides were to blame, and it shows a more optimistic view of human-Silurian relations, and it's refreshing to see a different approach considering how many other aspects of the story are very similar to the 1970 story. To conclude, both stories take a very different approach to side characters, and since their reactions and actions are important in terms of the Silurian dilemma, which is the crux of the story, it makes quite a difference overall. Both do what they intend of their side characters extremely well, and I can't really pick either as definitively better in this category. It all comes down to personal preference. I'm more inclined to the very cynical view taken by the original due to my own taste and sensibilities, but I should consider this category a draw since they are both of equal merit in my view. The Silurians is the next point of discussion, and for me this is where the newest story doesn't do as well. In the original, while I admit that perhaps the Silurian society and the characters within it could have done with a little more development, Malcolm Hulke does a very good job of making them feel very alien to us. They have excellent costumes, don't really look anything like humans, and they act very differently, not really understanding exactly what the humans are doing sometimes, as things are so different between the two species. This, in my view, is important, as it shows just why humanity and the Silurians are so incompatible. The difference is too much for either side to overcome, and it merely breeds fear and hate. This shows why every time a new Silurian colony is found, a peaceful solution is not found. In contrast, I think the newer story makes the Silurians far too human. The design of the costume shows them having extremely human faces, unlike the original design, which is quite far removed from our own looks. Compounding this is the way that they acted a lot like humans. It's difficult to express in precise terms, but the dialogue, their actions, and what we see of their society, it's very human. This for me diminishes what makes the Silurians work, with them being too different to the point where an understanding can't be reached. Here, they're so like us, it wouldn't be too hard to integrate them on the surface in comparison. Maybe this shows why showing us slightly less in the original might have actually been a strength, as sometimes less is more, and the fact that less was left up to the imagination in the newer episode damaged how the Silurians work in terms of storytelling, in my opinion. While this certainly isn't the worst crime scene the script/costume make, it does take away from the Silurians in my view, which was something that just wasn't an issue in the original, which did them far better. The clear winner here is the Silurians. The final category is the production in terms of direction, set design and other elements like that. The Silurians has one of Classic Who's finest directors behind it, Timothy Coombe, who sadly didn't get a work on the show after The Mind of Evil after going over budget. It's all shot exceptionally well, and I particularly like how he masks the appearance of the Silurians until the full reveal in episode 3 by keeping them in the shadows, or recording with it in front of the camera but obscured by the glare of the sun. It's excellent stuff, which makes it a visually interesting story despite the small budget. The sets are decent, but they're nothing to gawp at, which is unsurprising given the budget. I do love some of the location work in the moorlands in London though, it's lovely stuff. The direction of the newer episode is very competent. I particularly like all the shots in the graveyard when it was dark. It's just a shame that those kind of shots only really occur early on in the episode when what's going on is still a mystery. The set design varies. It's pretty uninteresting on the surface other than the excellent location work at an old church. However, the sets down in the Silurian city are really good. It all looks really nice and unique. The bits when the CGI is the backdrop are less impressive, however, to say the least. Overall, I'd say given the fact that both of them are low-budget BBC sci-fi shows, they're both produced rather well. They're visually interesting and serve their respective stories well. I can't really choose a winner here, as in this category neither really outshines the other. Good work on both nonetheless. To conclude, the Silurians is the easy winner here. The Hungry Earth/Cold Blood is a very competently made story for sure, and they did like what it did with its side characters. However, there's no forgetting the fact it's merely a retreading of the same territory already covered by the Silurians for the most part. It doesn't bring much new to the table, and it doesn't really excel in all the ways the original did, and it almost feels pointless because of it. A decent story for sure, but it isn't a match for the Silurians, which in my opinion is one of Doctor Who's greatest stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all back next time in another video.